Ale ty teraz prowadziłaś. Sponsorship in action as promised. We have Phil Wolfenden representing Cisco, Vice President, Cisco Customer Experience, Europe, Middle East, Africa, joining us this morning. Hello, sir. Hopefully you can hear me. We can't hear you yet, but hopefully in a moment we will. In the meantime, Poulami Majumdar is also joining us from Cisco, representing Equity and Fairness Consultancy or Consulting. Hello.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon.
Great to hear you. Let's just make sure we can hear Phil. Phil, can you say something, please?
Yes, I'm hoping you can hear me. I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you really well, but let's start by clarifying, Sandra.
Oh, I love that question.
Exactly. Sponsorship, we all know the classical meaning of the term, but what does it mean in our context?
Okay, so I'll just take a step back, Lukash, before I really delve into why Phil and I are here and why are we talking about sponsorship and why Cisco sponsorship is the topic of discussion today. So I think we all know sponsorship typically means that it's a relationship that accelerates careers. And a sponsor is typically a person who uses their influence, their network, their credibility to advance someone's career. So a question, I think you just touched upon as to how is it different from coaching or mentoring. So coaching we see is mostly on the job. It happens organically as part of a manager-subordinate relationship. Mentor is, however, someone who offers guidance by drawing on their own knowledge and experience and helps one navigate career situations. But while coaching and mentoring are important for one's career development, by itself, they are not enough to help people advance in their careers, and which is where sponsorship kind of comes in. Because sponsor is someone who will use their influence, their reputational capital to really advocate for opportunities and career advancement. So a simple way to explain it is a coach talks to you, a mentor talks with you, but a sponsor talks about you, especially when you're not in the room to represent yourself. So that's a background that we have about why sponsorship. But subsequently during the discussion is when we'll really delve into why Cisco sponsorship has a key differentiator from traditional sponsorship programs which are available in different organizations and industries. So I was kind of hoping that we'll go over to Phil, who's a seasoned sponsor himself at Cisco, to really share what his thoughts on sponsorship in practice is and what his experience on the sponsorship journey has been.
Fair enough.
Thank you, Poulami. And sponsorship, as Poulami has said, is central to our culture and our leadership practices here at Cisco. And you could say that the way we advance people is a little bit based on finding a successful sponsor in the company. All of the senior leadership are very well seasoned at sponsorship because first of all, it's something that we need to do. But most importantly, it's something that, frankly, we all really enjoy. So why is it important? It's important that I'm a senior person in the company. I sit in many conversations about talent. I sit in talent reviews. I'm asked for recommendations for people for particular roles. It's really important that I use my voice. I advocate for the people that I've agreed a sponsorship relationship with. And some of that requires a little bit of intimate knowledge. Of course, a sponsor-sponsee relationship is a business relationship. But for me to be very successful and effective at amplifying someone's voice, I need to know what that voice is. What does that person want from their career? What are their aspirations? How do they like to be represented?
Phil, I'm hearing
foundational is kind of understanding the person very well.
Mm-hmm. You went a bit further with the story because I will get back to that point. What I've heard from your experience and the Cisco experience is that sponsorship, it's embedded in the culture of the organization, right? So that makes it more natural, more common to see in the organization. And I think that's a fantastic way of doing it. Yet I will start with a question before you go into describing the relationship, but who can be a sponsor actually?
Well, the short answer is anyone. To be an effective sponsor, however, I think you need a couple of extra things. So you need a platform on which to speak. So you need to find someone, if you're looking for a sponsor, you need to find someone who is going to shout your name in a particular place. And you need to have someone who is interested in you and what you want. So anybody, but they have to be in the right place at the right time and interested in you.
Now, quite stereotyping question comes to my mind, and I will dare to ask it. Does it mean that a person who's rather introverted shouldn't be a sponsor because that will require some activities from the person that are not necessarily comfortable for?
No, not at all. And I'll go back to you need to know the person. I sponsor many introverted people myself. And although I'm not particularly introverted, they would be uncomfortable with me shouting their name. They would prefer I whisper their name. Introverts can be just as effective sponsees as extroverts.
That's good. That's good to hear that it's not limiting on the personality level. And we are all very busy people, especially executives and senior managers have very busy agendas. Then I can imagine that the question of what's in it for me is a question that a sponsor could ask themselves before assuming such role. Phil, what's in it for you?
Well, two things. First of all, I get to know quite intimately top talent in the company. Well, I run a business in the company. It's great for me to know who the top talent is, and so I get first pick. You could say if I'm selfish about it, but way more than that, I get to know exceptional people across the company. Typically, people I wouldn't bump into in the normal course of my day. I get to expand my exposure to exceptional talent I wouldn't meet, and I get to talk about them and celebrate them and amplify their qualities and their value. And who wouldn't enjoy that? I can't believe, honestly, I get paid to do that. I would do that for nothing.
And that's a beautiful motivation to have and a wonderful way to articulate it. So thank you for that.
Indeed. Sounds very rewarding. But let's go back to the story you already initiated before about the relationship. How does the relationship works? How it's set up? Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, and it goes back a little bit to your question about introverts and extroverts. And so if I'm to advocate, if I'm to amplify a person's voice, I need to know what that voice sounds like. Not literally sounds like, but how would the sponsee's voice like to be heard? Where would they like to hear it? What would they like me to say about them on their behalf when they are not in the room? And what is it they actually want me to achieve on their behalf? Is it career progression? Is it a change of career? Is it a sideways move? Is it just a little bit of more visibility? Is it an opportunity to present to the board? Is it something very specific? So a way of understanding the objectives and the expectations from the relationship is really important. I'll add that I particularly enjoy and find it useful to really understand the person, not just understand what they want, but understand how they operate, what their background is, what their aspirations are, what their style is, because I like to get into the head of the person so that I'm representing them in the way that they would like. So it's a very close relationship. In a way, probably one of the closest relationships you'll have at work, and it's not fair. It can be sometimes a little bit uncomfortable for sponsees who are new to being sponsored, but that's how I like to work the relationship.
Yeah, I think it's very meaningful to highlight the difference between mentor and sponsor again, right? Because those are not the same roles. As you said, it's all about being very explicit in supporting sponsee in the business environment, mentioning the name in the right moments when it comes to promoting them and helping them advancing their careers. And I think, yes?
Yeah, please.
Then I'm wondering, what advice would you give to a person who is newbie in the role of sponsor?
Make sure that you choose your sponsee quite carefully. And based on what I've just shared around the relationship and it being effective, not every sponsor matches every sponsee. And I'll give you an example. I was a little while ago asked to sponsor someone who was based on the west coast of the US in a completely separate part of the company to me. Um, I knew some people in that organization, but frankly, several layers in the organization above where the person was, I didn't know anybody else lower down the organization. So I could have formed a relationship very well with the person, but I was in none of the conversations representing that person. You know, the talent discussions about that person, I was not invited to. So I just felt I could add no value to that sponsee relationship. So be a little bit selective, be practical, and be honest with yourself. Are you actually wasting the sponsee's time and pretending that you can amplify their voice when actually it's going to be ineffective? I would say that's something to watch out.
Very powerful. Łukasz, you were about to ask a question.
Yeah, I think it's a super important perspective, Phil. So thank you for that, because not only have you pointed out what the risks are attached to the role and also the benefits, I would imagine a lot of people may see the sponsor role as additionally time consuming to whatever you're doing as your main responsibility. So I think your voice really addressed that risk potentially in a really impactful manner. So thank you for that. And not to be too positive about everything I say, because that's the role, I imagine. So I would say that one of the downsides of being a sponsor a number of times is that you risk getting a nickname like Phil the Confessor, for instance. You never know with this speaks, because people talk to you on a more private level, creating expectations in the process. Now that we've talked about the sponsor perspective, why don't we take a closer look at the sponsee perspective? What are the attributes and benefits maybe of being a sponsee? Because from what Phil has told us, the benefits appear to be clear, but maybe you can shed more light on that, Poulami, please.
Yeah. So in this case, as Phil very rightly said that, while it's the responsibility of the sponsor to select the sponsee carefully, actually the larger part of about 70% or more of the responsibility actually lies with the sponsee to ensure that they are sponsorship ready. So that, the three things which are very important is building, their performance, their credibility, and investing in building that trust with the sponsor. Because why would somebody put their reputational capital, their visibility, their network to your benefit if they are not convinced about your potential? So large part of the onus actually lies on the sponsee to really seek out a sponsor, have them convinced that they are indeed worthy of this relationship. And even during the course of the relationship, the sponsee has to be the one driving it forward. Really taking on the responsibility of being clear about their goals, taking feedback, actually leveraging the network that the sponsor opens for the sponsee. So there lies a lot of responsibility on the sponsee to ensure that the relationship actually thrives and they derive maximum benefit from it, as the sponsor is really helping them along the way. And in no way should they assume that they have outsourced their growth to the sponsor in the process, because the onus will still lie with them.
I think it's super important what you've just said, Poulami. Sponsorship ready. I think what we're saying between the lines here is also that there may be a couple of factors that Phil is looking at when assessing this readiness, which again, Sandra reminds me, I do quite a bit of public speaking coaching, and I work mostly with CEOs and management boards, people who have large egos as a rule. So I suppose part of that sponsorship readiness is understanding that someone really has a degree of resistance initially to sponsorship. And one of the reasons may be the ego. There will be others. Phil, can you comment on that? Criteria while assessing your potential sponsees. What do you look at first? What are the most important things you're looking at?
the most important thing I look at first is why. Why do I want sponsorship? And as I think back to that point around sponsorship ready, a very clear view of what you want to get from the sponsor relationship. Because vague kind of, well, I just wanted to get to know someone who's more senior than me, typically that isn't going to work, and that could be more of a mentoring or coaching relationship. Sponsees who are sponsorship ready have a very clear objective in mind. I want my name to be here. I want my brand to change to this. I want to achieve notoriety, visibility in that organization over there. So some very clear objectives is what I would look for first.
Phil, sadly, we've run out of time, but we've got a long list of questions that I really want to read out to you. So raise your pens, take notes, and please feel free to address at least one of those. And I do know also that you have something called the multiplier effect at Cisco, which does imply you want this to grow organically and spread within the organization. So let's get to questions. Barbara, addressing a question to Phil, please describe the relationship a bit more, like the structure, frequency of meetings, etc. We've got another question from Slima. What are some specific, maybe creative or innovative ways that sponsors can advocate for the folks they support? Emily is asking, if a sponsor is a role model with a megaphone, who's a mentor? Barbara is asking, with the Me Too backlash, how do you navigate the male-female sponsorship and its tips and its roles here? And last but not least, Natalia, how to start your sponsorship program? And you've got like 30 seconds to address all of these.
Can I just say yes, no, yes, maybe not?
Much welcome.
I remember the first one. So how does the relationship work and the frequency? The way I run that relationship is we have an introductory meeting to make sure we're, back to the previous answer, we have clear objectives. I know where I can add value. A getting to know you session, make sure we're compatible and that I can actually help the sponsee. And then it's as frequent as we need it to be, which is vague. But typically there is at least a quarterly check-in to make sure that I'm staying aware and close to the person. But in between, I like to explore achievements they've had, because that's actually that's my fuel. That's my that's what I'm celebrating and that's what I'm advocating. So when they've finished a project, when they've done a great presentation to a customer and got great feedback, something that they can celebrate with me, so that first of all I can congratulate them, but also that's fuel to my repository of things I can celebrate on their behalf. So that would be the answer to that one.
Thank you very much, Phil. Poulami?
So I think, Phil is really the best person to talk about all the nitty-gritties of the sponsorship journey itself. So I think he's pretty much covered it. What I would want to kind of leave this, and considering we're almost out of time, is leave it with one thought on the multiplier effect, because that's why I think Phil and I are here. Because at Cisco, we have taken sponsorship a step ahead, and we encourage leaders across levels to sponsor across difference. We encourage leaders to sponsor diverse talent, because we believe traditionally sponsorship programs goes into the affinity bias, the comfort zone, bringing in some biases into the process. And which is what we want to get the message out there, saying that if we really have to bring in equity to sponsorship, we should start looking at sponsoring across differences, across multiple dimensions. So that's my 2 bits on it.
Thank you very much, Poulami. Thank you, Phil. All we can say at the end of this super interesting conversation is that we certainly hope, Sandra, don't we, that your case study, an exemplary one, actually has more exposure. So I certainly hope, Phil, Poulami, you're publishing your efforts in a case study formula and there is easy access to it. So do feel free to share a link or 2 in our chat window so that we can read more about your fantastic efforts. We talked about quality over quantity. I suppose it's a perfect example.
Exactly, and importance of sponsorship on different levels. Here we've heard about individual level. Yesterday we talked a lot about sponsorship for D&I strategy. So sponsorship, it's critical everywhere, it looks like.
And you can also see that from the number of questions. We haven't even read them out all of them. So once again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day and all the best.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all.